I like a good cocktail every now and then, but this is like a 4-cocktail picture.
Hello, and welcome to the California Tiki podcast, where we explore America's mid-century fascination with Polynesian idols, pineapple cocktails, and coconut palm trees. This week, for our third episode, we talk about Cobra Woman, the 1944 South Seas adventure movie starring Maria Montez. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of fans who have seen it, so warning, spoilers ahead. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, co-author of California Tiki, coming this August from the History Press. With me in Los Angeles is Adam Foshko, screenwriter and director of story development for Call of Duty, Skylanders, and the Destiny franchises, including story consultant on Destiny 2. Say hello, Adam.
How are you tonight, Jason?
I am so excited to talk about this movie, this weird, deeply weird movie. Okay, all right. Here's what Wikipedia says, and then I just want to hear your opening thoughts about Cobra Woman. Okay, Cobra Woman is a 1944 American South Seas adventure movie directed by Robert Siromak, starring Maria Montez and John Hall. This was a duo that were in a lot of movies together, and their faithful companion Sabu, shot in Technicolor. It is very typical of her career at Universal Pictures, and it's venerated as a camp classic. There are a lot of people who really enjoy a lot of the sets and the symbolism and the strange accent of Maria Montez. Leonard Maltin gave it 3 stars. This is Cobra Woman, and just to put this into perspective, this is the same year that what else? What else came out in 1944? Let's see, Gaslight came out in 1944. Gone with the
Wow.
Wind came out 6 years before 1944. Just to put in perspective the world that this movie exists in.
Yes. So they
Okay,
knew how to make pictures, yeah.
they knew how to make movies. Now, tell me about Cobra Woman.
I got to tell you, I had forgotten about this picture. I think I think Leonard Maltin, and then you may have just called it we certainly just called it a forgotten camp classic. I think that speaks for itself, and it sells it fairly well. It is one of the strangest movies I've seen in a really long time. Like, the fact that it was made this way intentionally boggles the mind. I think we're taking it on as stressing on the South Sea adventure part of it, which is very Tiki. So I think this is where the intersection of this sort of of genre actually, and maybe even a dash of sensationalism intersects with South Sea adventure.
Yeah.
And I see it. You could look at the poster and say, okay, this promises to be a rollicking adventure with a certain amount of danger and thrills and escape. And this is very Tiki. This is very, with the Cobra Woman, you get the idea, like cat people, or
Yes.
I don't know, the reptile, which is like pictures that we've seen. With the sort of like where reptiles, where cats, where whatever. There is not a were snake in this entire picture. It is one of the craziest things somehow between the casting, which we'll go into in a minute, and the unbelievable accents from all over the place.
Yes.
And these people with the crazy one-syllable names, living in exotic places, and then they have a chimp as a pet, and then they go off to this crazy Cobra Island, and then Lon Chaney appears out of nowhere and has a place in this movie. It is, between that and the sets and the crazy writing, it is absolutely wonderful, really, when you get down to it, because it is one of those pictures that you would have on a Saturday afternoon, and you would just let it play, and you would just let it go. It has a lot of charm. There's nothing sort of bad-natured about this movie. The adventure is kind of there. I could see why Leonard Maltin didn't just shoot it out of the sky, because for all of its terrible sets and its ridiculous writing and not particularly good acting in places, there's something enormously charming about it. And there's nothing bad-natured. You just kind of let it go, and it kind of has a mind of its own. Not in the way
and it's existing in a world that is completely divorced from our own, even in 1944. A lot of people have written about the fact that the South Seas presented in a movie like Cobra Woman are a South Seas that are, and this is where it fits into the idea of Tiki culture, which is the idea of an exotic environment that's intended to be real, but one essentially of it's a real dream. There's no sense that you could actually get on a plane and go to any of the place. Cobra Woman starts out like the movie begins not in the cult of the Cobra Cult Island, which is a place that exists in this movie, but on a wholly different South Seas island that is occupied by some Scottish people and
Or at least one Scottish guy.
one Scottish guy, and this is the kind of movie where when the Scottish guy is on screen, Scottish music plays on the soundtrack. You know, it's one of those
Totally.
like and his good friend John Hall is getting married to the beautiful Maria Montez, who our Scottish guy has raised since she was a little girl. And then on the night before, oh, and we also meet Sabu, their faithful companion, who is a sort of monosyllabic, fairly smart but teasing native boy. You know, the Eurocentrism and the ethnocentrism definitely on display. This is definitely a universal picture of this period.
But John Hall plays someone named Ramu, which makes no sense.
Yeah, that makes no sense either, because John Hall plays that part as though he's Indiana Jones. He has a sort of square jawed swagger. He talks with a kind of with a kind of sarcasm that is completely the kind of thing that Indiana Jones was taking off, and likewise that Charlton Heston was doing in movies like Song of the Incas. Uh, so the night before John Hall is to get married to Maria Montez, again, you're right. His name is Ramu, the very, very Caucasian, white, square-jawed Ramu.
Right.
The night before he is to marry Maria Montez, who plays Talia, she is kidnapped off the island and back to the island of the snake cult, the Cobra cult. So off he goes to Cobra Island, and it is there that we meet.
She's kidnapped. She's kidnapped actually by the blind, not blind Lon Chaney Jr.,
Oh
who
my
just
God,
rolls
yes,
his eyes up into his head and
Lon Chaney
basically
Jr.
who basically is the golem who is sent to basically retrieve her from this place where she escaped some years before with the Scottish guy as a baby and was
Yes,
raised inexplicably put in his boat when he himself made an escape from Cobra Island as he was about to be killed because he was a stranger, because all
right.
on Cobra Island, except he inexplicably escapes. He wakes up. He was tortured into unconsciousness, wakes up on his boat, and there's a baby on board too. So he takes the baby home and raises her
Yeah.
as his own. And this is the woman who is to be married. And she has two very strange scars on her wrist, which are basically, they look like puncture wounds.
They are
So,
scars that look like open wounds. I mean, they're
yeah,
pretty.
they're not, they haven't healed.
Yeah,
At
you know,
all. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. Clearly, it's a cobra bite from many years ago or 5 minutes ago, depending on how you're looking at it.
it's so
But this
absurd.
is the woman who is kidnapped, and there's
Yeah.
this repartee somehow between the Scotsman and also and Lon Chaney and this kid with a monkey
Mhm.
who sort of runs throughout this entire picture.
And
Yeah,
since we're all
it's
about the
like that.
spoilers, we may as well sort of tie that together. Though the reason why Scottish guy who had came to the island and was to be killed, the reason why he was set free with the baby is that, as we learn later, the grandmother, who is ostensibly the queen but has no power on the Cobra Cult Island, she put the baby onto the Scottish guy's boat so that it would survive, because otherwise they didn't need twins to be queen. They needed one, and so they were going to kill the other one. And so she put this, that's why she would have saved the Scottish guy, put him on the boat, gave him the baby, off he goes. Now the baby is of age, and she has sent for that baby to be kidnapped back to become a benevolent ruler. Um, Unasked. We do not ask. Why couldn't you have just raised the other queen not to be evil? You know, that would have been good. And
Right. Now, how did you find this one anyway? How did you find Julia in the wherever she was going
yeah,
far away from Cobra Island? And then other questions you want to ask? My goodness, I don't know. I mean, but we don't know any of that going in. We just know that she's been abducted, and the Scottish man basically tells Ramu that you should just forget her and move on. And he goes, no, I'm going, and gets into his boat and heads towards Cobra Island, but with Sabu as a stowaway inside his own
as a
boat.
stowaway, because that's just how these things work in these movies.
Of course.
Oh my God, how does Lois Lane get to come on the trip? She sneaks onto the plane. How does Boy manage to follow Tarzan all the way to the village of the aliens? Because he stows away. It's just how
I gotta
these
tell you,
things
I was
happen.
pretty sure that was a thing growing up. I always thought that was a way you could get around. Was possibly because I watched too many of these movies. As a kid, I was like, oh, sure, I could get to wherever, Grand Canyon, New York, I don't know, space, who cares? But
Yes.
I think later, like, I could stow away, and not
Spa-
thinking for a
Space.
minute that would just be a terrible idea.
People did get to, well, at least in the movies, they get to space by stowing away. Sure, they do. Absolutely. Yes. So anyway, they get to the Cobra Cult Island. So here is the thing that if the listener is interested in watching this movie, you can really skip everything, honestly, up to the point where they get to the island and then just watch it from there, because that's where all the good stuff is. Let us count the ways. First of all, it's beautiful. The color is gorgeous. It's really gorgeous.
Technicolor.
Yeah, it's
Technicolor.
Technicolor. It's not
Right.
really shot in the South Seas. It's actually shot somewhere in Burbank, but it's beautiful. It's really, you've got these giant throne rooms. They don't look like super expensive as much as, some other films of the period, but what's going on with a spectacle like this is, I think you're supposed to be sitting in there watching this movie, right? It's Friday night, you're with your family or you got a date or whatever, and you're watching the movie. And I think the idea is, oh my God, look at all these guards coming in, and they've got big spears, and they're wearing hats with big golden things on them, and here's all these women, dancing, and here's all this gold shimmering and stuff. I think it's just supposed to just dazzle you. And in a way, you can be dazzled by it and just watch it, and you know if you look closely, it none of it makes any sense at all. Okay, a
No, I
key.
mean,
Yeah,
her accent makes no sense. The
her
fact that
accent's
the guards are
hilarious.
all dressed pretty much like they're Indians,
Yes.
they're Eastern Indians,
Yeah.
as opposed to, I don't know, being in the South Seas, completely different. No one in the South Seas is dressed like this, and you might have there would be a Raja would show up in this at some
Well, those
point with
hats that they're wearing are Peruvian hats. They're wearing Peruvian hats. They're supposed to be somewhere in the South Seas. Maria Montez, who plays both a girl who has grown up with a Scottish man on a South Seas island, and who also has
right.
grown up as the evil queen of a South Seas island. Both of those characters have an accent from Dominican Republic, because that's
And
why
and
it's.
the same accent, no less, which
Yes.
is not surprising, but
they and her accent is so beautiful. It's beautiful to listen to. What's going on here? This is Universal had this thing where they would match people up. So John Hall and Maria Montez made, I'm not making this up, 6 movies together, where they played the love story, the romantic leads, and he was an adventurer and blah blah blah. This is exactly what also was going on at exactly the same period with Ricardo Montalban and Esther Williams, where in
oh
that
sure.
case he's the exotic one, she's the American. Those movies involved a lot more swimming, because Esther Williams was really into swimming. But this is just, this would definitely not be a lead movie, but you'd go to it and it's like, oh well, great, okay, we have a John Hall and Maria Montez adventure this week. How awesome is that?
Sure, and that seems like a thing that you would if they were on the bill, you would go see it and be like, oh, this is a South Sea adventure. Sure,
Yeah.
we're on board. Because this is
Yes.
third picture they did together, I want to say. Which one was this?
I don't know, actually. I don't know what number.
Because it was.
It might be the third that they did together.
I have to try to remember, but it was like it's one of those things where it seems like you were more about the matchup at that time.
Yeah.
Even I think if you were watching these movies, than kind of what the movie was about. Like you weren't looking for like now we go, oh, it's this kind of a picture. Who's in it? So and so, and it's Tom Cruise is in it. Great. You're not necessarily going out to go see a Tom Cruise picture. You're going to go see this kind of picture and Tom Cruise is in it. And this is more like these people are in it. Oh, where are they this time? They're doing this.
Like Sonny
sure,
and Cher
I'm on
doing
board.
skits, right? It's like, okay, great. Okay, Sonny and
Right,
Cher
or
doing a Wild West skit.
maybe even Abbott and Costello, or maybe even in another kind of genre approach was if it was Karloff and Lugosi, if they were paired up in something, like what are they going to do? Well, it could be Black Cat. Really great, want to see it. And maybe that's the way it was approached then, because otherwise it's inexplicable.
Yes.
You really just go, was this a vehicle and they got attached to it? It's like, no, this was built up around them. They were kind of like, we need something for them, and I think they just kind of went, how about this? And it kind of spun out from there. And I think these were all contract players. So I think Lon Chaney was under contract with Universal then, and it made sense that he was taking a break from whatever he was doing. I'd actually look up his filmography at the time to see where this fell in, but it's a really weird departure for him, because we're used to seeing him in all kinds of other stuff. Not at all like this.
The Lon Chaney Wolfman, I want to say, was like 1943 or 44. Let's see what year that was. Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman. 1941. Oh, I apologize. So the Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman is 1941. This is 3 years after that. 3 years after that. Think about that. Lon Chaney Jr. was the lead in that movie. He played the romantic lead and also the villain, because it's it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, basically.
Sure.
That's astonishing because.
But I mean, keep going.
Well, I mean, he speaks, he dances, he's the romantic lead, and here he's under all of this cloth, and he's barely even seen, and he's mute, which is nuts. It's in what year? I wonder what year Werewolf of London was.
What did he do? Werewolf of London. What did he do after is the other question. So my guess is this was just a thing that he did. This could have taken him longer than a week.
Yeah, that's true.
Sort of show up and do this. It's like, while I'm in between pictures, I'll keep fulfilling my contract. I think it's just one of those. He's
Lon
not
Chaney
like
Jr.
said it would be good.
Lon Chaney Jr. played the Wolfman in 1941, and then the Ghost of Frankenstein. He was the monster in 1942. He was in The Mummy. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in 1943. He played Dracula in Son of Dracula in 1943. That was a famous movie. And then this is the year after he played Dracula. I can only assume that and in House of Frankenstein he's a lead. He plays Larry Talbot in that. So
is that after? That is not a lesser role, but it is a different role. Was that after this?
Yeah. Well, it's the same year, so it's released in December. So it's definitely after this movie.
This is him trying to break. This is him just fulfilling a contract and trying to break out.
I think it's just he's probably fulfilling a contractual commitment just to do stuff.
Yeah, this is the Lon Chaney Jr. contractual obligation.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing the way that, if you think of the way that worked, you had these people who just did movies. This is their job. This is, if you're sometimes you're a lead, sometimes you're a whatever. You're under contract, and the studio says what you're gonna do. We nearly, we should segue just a little bit. You and I nearly did a different movie, and the reason why, a reason we chose Cobra Woman is it definitely fits with the idea of California Tiki, of exotic worlds as imagined by Hollywood. We nearly did My Blood Runs Cold, which is also shot in California, and also was shot using contract players, because even though it was 1965, which is 21 years after Cobra Woman, we were still living in a world where you could make Troy Donahue just do a movie just because he was He was just working for
Oh,
the.
that's a good one. So he had a what we call now an overall deal, or he not an overall deal, but he had a deal to make a certain number of pictures,
Yeah.
and that just becomes one of
Yeah.
them. Interesting, they were still doing that.
And that was Warner Brothers, and we ended up not doing the picture for the show for this show because I think we both decided it was wonderful, but it's not quite tiki enough. It's more gothic and other stuff. I neat film. I mean, I
Yeah,
loved watching it, but it doesn't fit the themes that we're dealing with here. But it was the same thing. He did that movie. He may have liked that movie. In fact, he was really trying with that movie, but he was sick of the studio, and he forced the studio to let him out of his contract, but to his own detriment. I mean,
yeah,
they
that's sort of like almost put an end to his career, didn't it?
yes, yeah, and Troy Donahue had to move over basically to television and other stuff, and you know, uh, so yeah, so you went against you went against the studios at your peril
You
at
went
that time.
against Jack Warner. It was never a good thing. I think that's the, because I think it was probably he was on contract with Warner Brothers, if I remember correctly,
Yes,
and I think it was Jack Warner had well, anybody who was running a studio at that time had enormous power, and I think that's what happened with Donahue. But
yeah,
weirdly enough, as much as I like that movie, this particular one does actually have all the trappings of Tiki weirdly, and it's all
yes.
slightly sort of set askew.
Tell me
It's
about
not
that.
like you're
Like
well,
how do you fit? Where do you find the trappings of tiki in this movie?
well, the
I know
fact that
you're right.
think of it as sort of being, it is the South Sea, it's exotic, there's danger, there's
Yeah,
everything that, Middle America that, this is largely going to be a picture that people are going to see in America.
yeah.
That they'll just go, oh, it's out there somewhere, and it's got, it's got escape, it's got danger, it's got, sin, it's got, temples, it's got,
Well, and it's right, and
all
its
the stuff.
world is completely made up, but
Well,
based
and it's
on pieces of real things. Like
yeah,
we said.
but they're not held together by by fact. It's almost
Right,
by not mythology, but more like legend, more like you would. It's funny because I think you would hear stories post World War II. You would hear stories from sailors about these places, but like all good fish stories, there's some truth in them, but they're sort of held together by
yeah.
whatever, by kind of like this sense of like the tale being told. This is like a tale that like if you didn't see this movie, you would basically have someone telling you this story,
Yes.
and if they told it well, you would be riveted. The fact is, here it's because you're watching it, it's entertaining. It's not extremely well told because even as you're watching it, you're going, huh. I mean, we're looking at it in 21st through 21st century eyes. So
Right.
our sensibilities are probably a little bit different, but somebody could tell you this story and make it exciting. And this is
Yes.
where like a sea story, this could be something that would be, kind of amazing. It isn't like From Here to Eternity. It isn't,
No, but
there's
there's
no Valley
you're right
High in
about
this.
if you imagine the sort of glittering-eyed, fireside story, all the pieces that are there. There's this sort of forbidden sexuality stuff. The fact that he gets to the island and he immediately kisses the girl who is swimming but he's given an excuse. It's because
And he thinks it's right. He
he
thinks
thinks it's his own
it's the
fiance.
right.
And
And turns
but it's
out
not, right. It
right.
turns out it's the evil twin of the fiance. And she's
In reality, he would be killed on the spot. Let's face
right.
it. However,
But since he's a
in this
hunka burning
story,
love, he's allowed to wander the island more or less at will, depending on what faction he's sort of wandered into.
and this
There's
is the
the
island where all strangers are put to death. Let me just remind
right.
you.
Yes, but the retinue of girls who work for the queen are kind of down with strangers generally. They aren't particularly troubled by him. They gossip with him. They sort of give him advice on like
Yeah,
who's
I don't
going
think this is
where.
their rule. I don't think this is. I don't think they're going. We're going to have them all killed. We're going to have all strangers killed. I don't think they're in favor of this. I think this really comes from like one guy who's like the number two guy on the island, who
Yes.
generally is a terrible person and is most of the trouble of this island.
This is the actor who plays Martok. Now Martok, this actor seems to be like have wandered in from I don't know, like a gangster movie or something. He's just sort of always
Oh, he's
sneering
clearly
and
he normally wears a double-breasted suit, and and holding a. He feels very not at home in his outfit.
but you know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of things like Radio Ranch. You know, there's a whole thing that Gene Autry did where he and if I recall correctly, he and a couple of like stowaway boys wander down to like an undersea world, and everybody's wearing weird Roman hats, and I think there's an array of some kind that's going to destroy California, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, it reminds me of that because again, it's all of these like hardcore Brooklyn gangster guys who for some reason are now wearing these stupid costumes and wandering around with spears and whatever.
I would like to
Yeah.
point out that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I got nothing there. Go ahead.
I want to point out that this guy, Martok, who is the actor's name is Edgar Barrier,
Yep.
was actually in a film called The Giant Claw in 1943, and also the 43 version of Phantom of the Opera.
Really? The
So I mean, he
43
actually,
is that the 40, with Claude Rains, right? Is that right?
I think that's right. It's got to be because it isn't Herbert Lom.
Right, that would be the
So that's a
60s one, right?
'60s version.
So okay,
It's
I
got to be
like
Claude
the
Rains.
43. I love the 43
So
Phantom of the Opera.
so who did he play in Phantom of the Opera in '43 is a question.
I have no
Because
idea.
I remember that being a good movie.
It is a
And
good movie,
people
although
were.
it says here, okay, I've looked it up. Oh my God, he's the Vicomte Raoul. Well, that's
So,
interesting.
I mean, that's interesting. So he's, I mean, he pulls that off.
Yeah, I mean that's always a really a sympathetic character. That's interesting. It's a funny that's a very funny movie. In that one, there's like a trio. There's a love triangle, and it's actually a love square because there's Raoul is after Christine, the Phantom's after Christine, but there's also like a policeman who's after Christine. So there's lots of people who are who are after him. Anyway, who are after Christine. It's a good movie. It's funny. It has a comic ending, and it's gorgeous. It's Technicolor. But anyway, back to Cobra Woman.
All
The
right. So,
thing
all
to
right.
look
Sorry.
for. Go ahead. Yes.
So, all right. So he kisses the sister, the evil sister who's been ruling the island.
Yeah.
And what's strange is, let's see. What's strange is you've got Sabu is still running around as well because Sabu is stowed away on the boat.
Right.
And I think
He keeps
I
him from
think
getting
connects
eaten by a tiger or
by
a cougar
a
or whatever it
panther
is.
by using the
Yes.
blowgun, a blowgun that because all Scotsmen like to hand out blowguns.
Right.
Gave him a blowgun, and that seemed to work on the panther. And then there's this bit between the kid and Coco, who is the chimp, who was Talia's pet, I think, back on the mainland, who I guess got abducted with her, and they reconnect on the island again. So now it's like Sabu and Coco, which I'm sure was a great act on the road later that year.
Well, this actor Sabu, so this guy is actually a famous Indian actor, and I'm trying to find his name. Okay, the character's name is, I'm not making this up, the character's name is Kato. We're calling him Sabu because the actor's name is Sabu, and so I just remember that because it's like flashed really big on the screen. His name was Sabu Dastagir. He was Indian. He had American citizenship. He did a lot of movies as sometimes a romantic lead, sometimes a supporting character. And he also served in the war, holy mackerel, as a tail gunner. Good Christ.
Wow,
That's
kind of
dangerous.
amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, this guy had a very colorful career, and was in a lot of movies. So he came back from World War II and continued to do movies. But he joined the war. He joined the war to become a tail gunner. This guy, as you're watching Cobra Woman, he joined right after making this movie. That's mind blowing.
So he looks like a kid.
Yes.
He's got to be 20. He's got to be something. But he looks like a young kid because of just the way he looks.
Yep, he's 20 years old. He was born in 1924. Anyway, he plays one of these Hollywood boys who could be anywhere from like 11 to 20. And it's funny because did you watch Tommy Wiseau's The Room? It's a dumb question to ask. I don't know if you've bothered to.
I've seen I saw the original.
Well, one of
Yes,
the
I
weird
saw it.
things about The Room is this extra character who's like Tommy or whatever he is, who lives down the hall. And what people have observed is that Tommy Wiseau writes his movies because he's based on what he's learned about life from Hollywood movies. And it's true that if you watched a lot of old Hollywood movies, you had a lot of these young male characters who were of completely indeterminate age, who were there to do nothing but ask stupid questions of the hero and get in trouble, like get in scrapes that the hero had to get them out of, and occasionally to show up and save the hero when somebody needed to show up. And it's nothing that ever happened in real life. These characters are always weirdly aged, and he's got one of those characters in The Room, which we don't do anymore. But that explains, watching something like this explains a lot about why something like that shows up in The Room. So tell us about the single most memorable thing about this entire movie, and it is the Cobra dance.
Yeah,
There's
that is it, isn't it? That's going to be the thing that everyone remembers no matter what. I mean, there are other things to remember, but it really
right,
is the Cobra dance.
yeah, yeah. Let's see. How does this get started? We have well, it happens twice, but the one time that it happens well, essentially what's going
No, it
on is the
happens well.
well, better, better. So interestingly, you and I watched a scene from a 1959 movie called The Indian Tomb, where you
Yes.
had an identical Cobra dance, except for it's done really well. But
It's really it is done really really well. And let me
yeah,
just point out that I mean it was when we saw it, certainly when I saw it, it was done to different music.
right. It's done
Right.
the 1959 Indian Tomb Cobra Dance, whatever music it was originally used, is used as the music for a video for Martin Denny's Miserlou. And people will know Miserlou as the theme. A lot of people would call it the theme to Pulp Fiction. Anyway, Martin Denny did a version a few years before that version. It's used for this Cobra Dance. You got to see this Cobra Dance. Having said all that,
It's actually really great.
yeah, that's wonderful. That's 1959.
It
This is
right.
1944. This is weird. Uh, the evil
This
queen,
is very weird.
she does a dance. So here's what it's supposed to be. She does a dance where she's supposed to hypnotize a cobra, show off her power by not getting bitten by the cobra, and then during the ecstasy of the dance, she is going to choose volunteers who will then be locked away until it's time to sacrifice them to the volcano god. Uh, okay, all of that. I give you that as a choreographer. You come up with however the scene's going to play out. What actually happens is, first of all, Maria Montez, very sexy woman, terrible dance. This is an awful dance. She's just sort of randomly
Yeah,
thrusts her shoulders up and back and forward.
yeah. It's not so much arousing as it is sort of alarming. And you just you watch it and you should we stop her? Should
She's
we
circling
this was
around the cobra. She's
this was
sort
going
of
so well a minute ago.
herky jerky her shoulders up and down towards the cobra in her sort of shimmering sequiny structured gown. The
But
cobra is
again,
staring at her.
it's very good natured. So you really just kind of let it go.
Yes. She's picking the volunteers with like gun fingers. I'm not making this up. She's really like
Like yeah,
circling,
like
going
pew pew. Yeah, right.
like
And
you and you. And again, the
you're going to
cobra
be stuck in
is
200
staring.
of them. Oh.
It is I this is just the most bizarre, truly the most bizarre. And then what's hilarious is later on when when Talia has replaced her sister by tossing her off a balcony and has replaced her sister in the throne room, they say, well, prove that you are the queen by
And do
recreating her
the Cobra
amazing
dance.
Cobra dance. It's just so wonderful. And of course, she can't even do the, and she doesn't know to do the gun fingers because who would? And so it's, that is truly, truly one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
I hope somewhere on a like in a writer's room when they were making Seinfeld and they were going, God, Elaine needs to do this terrible dance. And, she could do how about we do this dance from from this movie. And they're like, I don't know if we can get by with it. I think we have to do the other thing with the thumb or whatever.
Oh
So
my
you know,
God.
but I think this would have been definitely in the running because it is that. And I should say she didn't throw her sister off. I mean, she was attacked by her sister, I think.
True.
And
That's very true.
I,
You do have a great scene where the evil twins face off against one another, and she has that classic line that people have really really loved. Do you remember the
oh, I
line?
know this. Oh,
Yes.
it's God, what is it? It's the give me the. It's like Peter Lorre should have said it.
Yes.
It's sort of like give me the Cobra Jewel. What is it? What is
Give
the
me the
line?
Cobra Jewel.
Yeah,
Give me
yeah.
the Cobra Jewel. The Cobra Jewel is what we need. Yes. Oh my God. It's wonderful. So
It's
I
kind of
mean,
unbelievable.
yeah,
You could listen. You could easily dismiss this picture in so many ways, but you know what? It's this. There's something about it. It's weirdly charming. It assumes a lot
yes.
in a way which makes you go. It's not an ugly American picture where
No.
you're kind of like going, oh well, it's people don't because this idea that what I'm trying to say is this idea that Americans could make up this sort of this kind of a movie about things happening around the world because they don't care, and it's either the ugly American, like the ugly
Mhm.
American will go and will conquer. Like the same movies that would send guys in, like the same reason that even Robert Armstrong went in and conquered Kong and the island and took Kong away, or would
Yeah.
show up and they were Jungle Woman or whatever. Any of these movies was like the white American dude's going to show up and and impose whatever. This is very much so he's doing his thing, and it's a sense of adventure, and this sense of it's weirdly charming. It's not an offensive movie. It actually could be well told if it was sort of maybe told a little bit differently, but it is very. I can see why people would have this. It'd be like a weird guilty pleasure movie.
I agree with
Or
you completely.
you would have it on in the afternoon and just be like, that was good to sort of reconnect with this again.
Well, think
There's
how great
something
this
very
movie.
interesting.
If you were having a party, if you were having a tiki party, right? Think how well this movie would play in the background. You don't need
Right,
music.
and
You don't need.
that's the
Yeah.
thing, right? You could even play. You don't have to listen to the dialogue or do anything. You can have this running and play
Yeah.
Martin Denny or whatever else. But I think that's the thing, right? It's the collection of all these elements that is what makes it so tiki. The fact
Yes.
that it's got all the different elements attached to it, and it just sort of is. You don't have to follow. You don't have to try very hard. You don't have to do very much. You have to just enjoy it for what it is. And it's sort of it conveys a mood and a style of sort of of something other than where you are,
Yeah.
other than what you have to sort of face. It's an escape that you don't have to think very hard about. In fact, if you do, it breaks. So don't.
Right.
And I think
That's
I think
true.
for that reason, it may be one of those things that is uniquely tiki in that sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there are certainly other movies that we will and we could have chosen that are much more serious or much more. I'm not even exotic, but I mean, they really are movies that like South Pacific or something like that. These are movies that are serious pictures that fulfill some of the same elements
Hmm.
that I think are serious cornerstones of kind of what we mean when we talk about tiki. But in its essence, this fulfills that as well, but maybe even in a truer sense, because it is so genuinely good-natured and enjoyable, and that makes it even greater than sort of the sum of its parts. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Absolutely, because you're right. If you analyze this, it's like picking apart a dream. It makes no sense at all. But if you look at any moment of it, there is not a single moment of this movie that does not look like what it is, if that makes any sense. There's not a moment where you're like, "Oh, I think this is a tiki kind of film," but there's nothing on the screen. There's always something on the screen that feels exotic and otherworldly. It's a it there's only a few movies that fit this bill, and this is even better than last week's. Honestly, this is even better
I agree,
than
and
Voodoo
I'm actually
Island.
delighted that we settled on this one. This is one that was not in rotation before, but
Yeah,
actually, I think I will add this to rotation because it's just that kind of a picture.
yeah, it's pretty amazing.
As much as I sort of have gone on, there are a lot of things about it that if I look at it critically, with a cinematic eye or with a story eye or whatever, it might just sort of fall apart. But just the fact that it's this for what it is a snapshot and it's super charming. So yeah, it's going to be on rotation.
Very good. So I think we should call it there. You've been listening to the California Tiki podcast. Look for us. Let your friends know about the show. Come to the Facebook page and let us know what you think and what you might want to be listening to. And also look for the book California Tiki, where we talk about this kind of stuff and lots more. We will be premiering it in August at the Tiki Oasis show. I don't know what we'll be back with next, but I promise it will be truly odd. And
I'm
Adam,
sure of that.
yeah, Adam, thank you so much for being on, and I will see you next time.
Thanks, Jason. Always great. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Good night. Bye.